In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro discusses former President Barack Obama, who recently expressed frustration with the Democratic Party's current state. Obama criticized Democrats for navel-gazing and whining, urging them to toughen up and actively support candidates rather than sitting on the sidelines. Shapiro points out the irony of Obama's position, given his own detachment from the party's grassroots and his history of missteps, including his role in Joe Biden's rise and the eventual replacement of Biden with Kamala Harris. Obama's call for courage and unity, while rhetorically inspiring, is seen by Shapiro as vague and disconnected from the realities facing the party. Shapiro elaborates on the generational disconnect between Obama and today's Democratic voters, many of whom barely remember Obama's presidency. The Democratic Party is no longer the technocratic, moderate force it was during Obama's 2008 campaign, but has shifted toward radical leftist policies that alienate many Americans. Obama's advice to embrace the abundance agenda clashes with the party's current trajectory, which increasingly embraces radicalism and identity politics over pragmatic governance. The podcast delves into the New York City mayoral race, where Zoran Mamani, a progressive socialist with radical views, maintains a lead despite opposition from establishment figures like Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams, both running as independents after losing the Democratic primary. Shapiro critiques Cuomo's decision to run again, acknowledging Cuomo's flaws, but suggesting that his candidacy might be the lesser evil compared to Mamani's socialist platform, which includes nationalizing grocery stores and ambiguous stances on violent extremist groups. Shapiro highlights Mamani's refusal to condemn globalizing the Intifada, a slogan associated with international jihadist violence, underscoring the troubling direction of the Democratic base in places like New York. The episode also draws parallels to Minneapolis, where Omar Fate, a Somali-American socialist, is running for mayor on a platform that includes rent control, increased minimum wage, and defunding or hampering police cooperation with ICE. Shapiro argues that the Democratic Party is increasingly relying on racially diverse candidates who espouse radical leftist policies, a strategy aimed at appealing to progressive voters, but one that risks alienating the broader electorate. Shapiro turns to California Governor Gavin Newsom, who is positioning himself for a presidential run despite widespread dissatisfaction with his governance. Newsom's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, homelessness, and wildfires has been widely criticized, and many residents, including Shapiro's own family, have left the state due to high taxes, cost of living, and poor quality of life. Newsom's attempts to straddle the line between technocratic moderation and radical progressivism leave him appearing indecisive and out of touch. Newsom's recent comments on transgender issues, where he dodged direct answers about the appropriate age for medical interventions, exemplify his political caution. His defense of California as a donor state generating 71% of the country's GDP is dissected by Shapiro, who explains that this statistic is misleading. California's high welfare spending, driven by its large urban poor population, contradicts Newsom's narrative of economic success. Shapiro emphasizes that the state's problems stem from policy failures rather than economic strength. The podcast then covers President Trump's evolving stance on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Trump announced plans to increase economic pressure on Russia through severe tariffs if a peace deal is not reached within 50 days. More importantly, he revealed that NATO allies would soon provide weapons and air defenses to Ukraine, with the U.S. stepping back from footing the entire bill. Shapiro praises this move as pragmatic and aligned with an America First policy, noting that it reflects Trump's responsiveness to real-world incentives rather than ideological rigidity. Trump's criticism of Vladimir Putin's empty promises and his insistence on tangible results mark a clear-eyed approach to foreign policy. Shapiro also discusses the potential economic consequences of tariffs, including inflationary pressures and retaliatory measures from the European Union, which threaten to escalate trade tensions. Despite these risks, Shapiro argues that Trump's cautious stance on interest rates and his pressure on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell reflect a nuanced understanding of economic realities. On the domestic front, Shapiro applauds the Supreme Court's decision to allow the Trump administration to proceed with layoffs at the Department of Education, viewing it as a step toward dismantling a bloated and politically radicalized bureaucracy. He criticizes the National Education Association for its extreme left-wing positions, including its rejection of the Anti-Defamation League's Holocaust education materials due to political disagreements over Israel and Gaza. Immigration policy also receives attention, with the Trump administration tightening detention rules for illegal immigrants by eliminating bond hearings in most cases. Shapiro supports this move as a necessary measure to enforce immigration laws effectively, contrasting it with Democratic leaders like Gavin Newsom, who bizarrely tout the economic contributions of undocumented workers. The episode highlights California Mayor Karen Bass's controversial distribution of cash cards to illegal immigrants through organizations linked to past riots, illustrating the Democratic Party's embrace of radical and divisive policies. Throughout the episode, Shapiro frames the Democratic Party as being caught between its old guard technocrats and a rising radical left wing. The party's embrace of identity politics, socialism, and anti-police rhetoric alienates many voters, contributing to its declining popularity. Shapiro argues that the party's future depends on whether it can return to the moderate, inclusive approach of Obama's 2008 campaign or continue down the path of radicalism that risks electoral disaster. He suggests that the Democratic Party's current strategy, relying on racially diverse socialist candidates to energize a narrow base, is unlikely to succeed nationally. Meanwhile, President Trump's pragmatic centrism and responsiveness to voter concerns position him as the most moderate and viable political figure in the current landscape.